this panel is called Exploring Presence, African or rather they'll be in conversation with each other on their collaborative book project, Exploring Presence, African American Artists in the Upper South. Our panelists today are Angela N. Carroll. She is an artist activist and an investigator of art history and culture. She is a curator and contributing writer for Sugarcane Magazine, Black Art in America, Be More Art, Hyperallergic, and others. She received her MFA in Digital Arts and New Media from the University of California at Santa Cruz and teaches within the Film and Moving Image program at Stevenson University and the FYE program at MICA in Baltimore, Maryland. And our next panelist is Dr. Leslie King Hammond. She is an American artist, curator, and art historian who is the founding director of the Center for Race and Culture at the Maryland Institute College of Art, where she's also graduate dean emeritus. King Hammond received a BFA degree from City University of New York, Queens College, and a PhD in art history from Johns Hopkins University. She's a chair of the board of the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of Maryland African American History and Culture. King Hammond has curated several exhibitions, including the Global Africa Project that was co-organized with Lowry Stokes Sims, the Charles Bronfman International Curator at the New York City's Museum of Arts and Design. King Hammond was awarded the Press Fellowship in 1974, a competitive fellowship given to curators and historians at the beginning of their careers. While at the Maryland Institute College of Art, King Hammond earned the Trustee Award for Excellence in Teaching in 1986. She received Mellon Grants for faculty research in 1988, 89, and 2005. So as you can see, we have two wonderful guests with us today, and we're very interested to hear about your project. Angela, would you like to open us up to begin the presentation, please?
Sure. Thank you so much, Mikhail, for this beautiful opportunity for us to share our work. I will say that this project is almost 3 years in the making, and I'm honored to be a steward, a writer, editor, collaborator, and conduit to bring forward a project that has had tremendous support from many Black creatives in and beyond the DMV region, which is the DC, Maryland, and Virginia region. Exploring Presence, African American Artists in the Upper South is an exhibition inclusive of a catalog and also a short docu-series that celebrates significant artists and accomplishments from this region. I want to share a brief excerpt from the introduction of Exploring Presence catalog before we jump into conversation and then also get into some of the short film clips. Our unabashed desire to do more than survive when we are faced with an unceasing barrage of systemic inequity and an unrelenting surge of psychological warfare against non-white bodies is not the sole force or foundation for our evolution, but perhaps makes more urgent the need to activate a meta mode of seeing. The world needs, but will never admit its reliance on the prolific sensibilities and visions of BIPOC creatives. We are called to invoke visions that break the bounds of one-dimensional space, singular narratives, and whitewashed histories. The advancements of that meta mode of seeing is a profound act founded in radical liberation and fortified by desires to deliver penetrating perspectives to the people by any means necessary. Undeniable genius is wrought from thousands of hours of creative experimentation, invention, and innovation. Black artists have proven themselves repeatedly to be meta in all regards, as seers, as griots, as archives for themselves and their respective communities, conduits and catalysts for new understanding, interceding doulas to yet recognized and oft misunderstood Black aesthetics. This collection of creatives represents a succinct selection of prolific visionaries who create from and informed by the liminal realms between northeastern art metropolises and the South proper. Artists in this collection include Schroeder Cherry, Linda Day Clark, Olitha Devane, Espy Frazier, Aziza Claudia Gibson Hunter, Martha Jackson Jarvis, Ed Love, Tom Miller, Joyce Scott, and Mama Paula Whaley. Though most were not born or bred in Washington, D.C. or Baltimore, Maryland, they each found, grounded, and educated and further affirmed themselves in the belly of Black enclaves situated at the border of the Mason-Dixon line in a region colloquially known as Up South or the Upper South. The Upper South is tethered to the Bible Belt and marred, like most other Black enclaves across the country, by the redundant systemic violation of redlining, state-sanctioned violence, displacement of long-term Black residents, and the unwavering parasitism of white supremacy. I'll pause there so that I can jump into the conversation with Dr. Leslie King Hammond. I am so honored to have this visionary, this icon, who saw this young, crazy, awkward kid trying to do all the things and was like, "Sis, I got you. What you need a forward. You need some words. What you need." And I just appreciate this sister so much. And I'm trying not to like get emotional, but we look to you, and you really stand in the position of a mentor to so many of us. So we are just so grateful for all of the work that you have done that allows us in our generation and future generations to do and continue this work and this labor. So that said, can you speak a little bit about why this region, Up South, is so, and has for a long time been so significant?
First of all, Angela, you are entirely too generous. I am totally flattered. I am just like flustered. I am overwhelmed with the generosity of your praise. However, I would like you and our audience to know that it is not my generosity, it is my purpose to become a mentor, counselor, a facilitator, medium, conduit, to nurture the new generation coming forward. When I saw and met you and I read your work for so long, I knew that you were a kindred spirit. And in like kind, it was important for me to respond to you. When you called, I echoed in response. So within our culture, we have this call and response. And it is very important for my peer group to recognize and to pull forward and pass that baton to you. That being said, my work has been clearly a mercy mission of salvation, of recognition, of looking between the voids, the fissures, and the cracks. I am northern born, bred, educated from New York City. I came to Baltimore region to work on my doctorate at Johns Hopkins. While I was here, I became very fascinated with this region, electing having not to go to an HBCU, but still very much concerned with the culture of my people as they evolved within this region known as Up South. This Up South region, within the canon and the historical legacies of art history, American culture, and heritage, has literally been somewhere between blindsided, forgotten, lost between the cracks. And part of that is due to the fact that a lot of attention in history has been given to the South as we know it, as it relates to the Civil War, slavery, the plantation cultures that emerged. And then in the midst of the evolution of history of the United States, as the communities, and especially the Black communities, began to migrate north, which was another edifice of itself by and large, because it was the center of urbanization. It was where, quote unquote, modernism was being developed. And so they sort of like took the train from the South and just went right past this Baltimore, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Virginia region on their way to the North to, quote unquote, supposedly a better life, which is something that Jacob Lawrence talked about in his migration series. However, I elected, having looked around this region, to stay in this region because I was fascinated with the discoveries that I found. You know, we forget that Benjamin Banneker was a major player in the development of the design and pattern and the mobility that occurred in the architectural design of Washington, D.C. People almost forget to remember that the first African-American painter in the United States, Joshua Johnson or Johnston, depending, a freed or freedman, all right, was a successful portrait painter in the city of Baltimore, painting all of the bourgeois families who were literally in support of the industries that were located in the Chesapeake Bay region. We forget that we had in the early 19th century, the largest community of free African Americans in Baltimore City. When Frederick Douglass came from the Eastern Shore and landed in Baltimore, he was in awe of the numbers of Blacks who were employed, self-employed, who were making money, being tailors, working in all of the various jobs located in the shipyards that needed care, caulking ships, seamstresses, barbers, hairdressers, dressmakers, the textile mills. People forget that this region had numerous textile mills in which the cotton that came from the South was then processed in the up South and then shipped to the North. So as I began to stay here to learn of the early history, two of my most contemporary memories of solidifying my commitment to work from this region, this up South region, was that the first two artists, active, prolific artists that I met were Joyce Jane Scott, who was in the book, and the other one was John Waters, all right? I mean, they were in the wackiest, most funkiest, most creative, beyond the box. They didn't even start in a box. They just went straight on steroids to their own creative essence. And I just said to myself, you know, I'm born and raised in New York. I have seen crazy in the art world. I have seen brilliance in the art world. I said, but there is a special kind of creativity that is going on in this region that nobody is paying attention to. So I think I'm going to hang around.
And we're so grateful that you did. I'm a little obsessed with all things Dr. Leslie and Dr. Lowry Stokes Sims. So I've tried over the last few years to basically purchase every book that you have ever published, every catalog that you have ever made for any exhibition. And it has been so, the prolific nature of your research and your scholarship and your dedication to covering Black creative genius, unsung Black creative genius, is what really is my kind of torch, you know, my dristi, you know, to move forward, because I know what's possible, right? Like you all have laid a foundation for what is possible so that we can move forward and push and expand even beyond that. I'm going to share my screen, and we are going to screen 3 films from the project. There are 10 films in total. The first film will be covering the extraordinary Joyce J. Scott, who is the 2016, I believe, MacArthur
Right.
Genius
Yes.
Fellow. She is a prolific glass worker, works in beads, works in sculpture with glass, with so many different mediums. And she sews, she does quilt work, she does everything in such beautiful ways. And she uncovers the narratives and the stories of Black experience here in the country and really across the diaspora. So we're going to start with a short from her, and then we'll go to the short of another prolific artist, Martha Jackson Jarvis, who is extraordinary, based in DC, raised between the Blue Ridge Mountains and Philadelphia. And then we'll move forward to look at photographer Linda Day Clark's work. She is based in Baltimore and has done extraordinary work here as a photographer, and is also a professor at a local HBCU, Coppin State University.
My name is Joyce J. Scott, and I'm a visual and performing artist. I was an artist in vitro. My mother, Elizabeth Caldwell Talford Scott, was also an artist. So I've actually been doing art since I was very, very young. My mother was my first art teacher, and I think she taught me to do beadwork when I was around 5. I literally am a kid who is a classic African American. My parents were sharecroppers who were in the Great Migration from North and South Carolina, who met here, coming here for a better life, getting away from night riders who would not let them move freely. My father worked at Bethlehem Steel. My mother did a variety of jobs, nannies, housekeepers, chefs. We lived across the street from the projects in Sandtown. Mm-hmm. So my being born in 1948 allowed me to live through the 50s, which means I still remember overt segregation, water fountains, other parts of the movie theater. It also means that I was being raised and a part of the 60s, the civil rights movement, the upfront cry for change. I'm an old hippie, so I was looking for like translucency, like everybody else in the 60s and the 70s. I chose beadwork because it is the passport that my mother gave me. When you travel in the world, everybody sews. There's somebody with a needle and thread, and then I added a bead because there's somebody who's adorned by beadwork somewhere. I love being part of this ancient technology that's reiterated everywhere in the world. I'm inspired by a lot of things. The subjects that I use are usually all the grandiose isms: racism, sexism, genderphobia, misogyny, xenophobia, all of those things, because they are the bedrock for many of the horrible kinds of existences and our reaction to those existences. I stand on the shoulders of those who gave their lives for me. It behooves me to stretch myself, to go beyond what I even think I can do, and then go beyond that. Because you know I'm a mug now.
I am Martha Jackson Jarvis. I'm a sculptor. I've been making art all my life. I started making art as a youngster in kind of rural Virginia. Kind of introduced to the natural environment, the landscape there in Southern Virginia. I grew up kind of at the base of the foothill mountains, Blue Ridge Mountains there. And it influenced my imagination about the landscape, about natural materials. And then from there, I guess the other really awakening in terms of an artist was when I showed up at Howard University in 1970. And that was the first time I had encountered professional artists from really all around the world who were there, and artists of color, sculptors, painters, dancers, theater people. So the fine arts of Howard University was an incredible crucible, if you will, in terms of creativity and the acknowledgement that being an artist was a lifetime commitment and event, a spectacular event in anyone's life. So it was extraordinary to experience artists and work with Lois Mailou Jones, Ed Love, who was my sculptor professor, Valerie Maynard, who came through, Huey Lee Smith from New York was there, Skunda Bogossian, Ethiopian artist. It was endless. Charles White would come through, Mary DePillars. These were people who were always coming through. David Driscoll, Sylvia Snowden. The list could just go on and on in terms of a life of serious-minded people who were committed to the arts. So I remember walking into the sculpture class and Ed Love saying, it's like no accident that we're all here. And each class was taught with this legacy of history from James A. Porter, who was the head of the art department. And then in the 70s, there was a transition when Jeff Donaldson was coming from Chicago, bringing the news of Afro-Cobra. So the 70s, the end of the 60s, all of that firmament was happening, the energy, the knowing. So there was an incredible incubation that was happening. I work now as a sculptor, and I use that one word to describe. And now people talk about, I'm a multimedia artist, I'm doing all these things. But I'm really interested in kind of the science of materials, the innate power and energy that lives and exists in almost every object. It is an African tradition to believe in animate and inanimate objects, each having power. So my work over the years has really been about kind of the research of how to tap into that presence, unending source of energy. I enjoy bringing together disparate materials, disparate times. It's almost this cumulative time lapse, see how you can fold time, if you will. So my ceramics was always about the construction of building things, putting things together, objects, and then the notion of the cumulative image, moving from the minuscule, microscopic to the macro. So my work was always about moving from intimate space almost into public space. I hope as an artist that the work has the breath and the strength to speak, right? Beyond my voice, beyond this presence, that it has a life of its own. And that life speaks about the energy of our ancestors that's unending, that has crossed the globe, undiluted, unbroken, undiminished.
I'm Linda Day Clark. I'm a photographer. I'm inspired by people. One of my first big series was here in Baltimore on North Avenue, photographing the North Avenue community. And I got involved because essentially everyone had told me to stay away from North Avenue, that you would die, that there was nothing but drugs and crime and violence. And I was living in the North Avenue community, and I knew there were decent, human beings there who were being overlooked by these stereotypes of crime and violence in this Black community. So I picked up my camera to do battle, to sort of show the humanity in this community. And so I would just walk and talk to strangers and photograph that community. And I did it for more than a decade, just walking this notorious community and photographing individuals and trying to show their beauty, their dignity, their humanity. And I continue to do work like that. I photographed in West Africa while I was living there for a few months, trying to show the beauty and the humanity of this, West African nation, or these West African people. My latest series is photographing a remote, tiny community in a place called Gee's Bend, Alabama. And so I've been doing that for almost 2 decades now. I'm fascinated by sort of the uniqueness of individual people. And as it turned out, people who are underrepresented or misrepresented, trying to give them their moment in the sun and a record that's positive in their life. I think of the face as a sort of landscape. And so I tend to get in close, and I'm intimate. I like to push and pull space. I like to play with color. I think people will try to say that maybe I'm a social documentary photographer, but I don't think so. I know that I'm making a comment. Social documentary is supposed to be about objectiveness and unbiased. And I know that I'm making a statement clearly about the people I'm photographing. It's just a comment that we rarely see. I was pretty much a knucklehead for, like through grade school. I was actually pregnant in my senior year of high school, and I got married and stayed home and raised my son. And then when he was about 5 and I was ready for school, I realized I needed to do something more, to make a better life for him and myself. So I went back to school. And so that's where I found photography, sort of by accident. It wasn't on purpose, but once I was bitten, I've never let go. It's my passion, and so now it's in my blood. And so I went to school for undergrad and graduate school in photography. I know that I picked up the baton from some very powerful folks. The legacy in America is that many of the early photographers, American photographers, were Black photographers who wanted to pick up the camera to do battle, to make sure that there was a legacy and a page in history that reflected people of color the way we might want to be reflected. And so I follow in those footsteps of early American photographers who want to hold a mirror up to America, who want to say something. And I'm very blessed that I've been able to connect clearly with some of my heroes. I've been able to spend a moment with Gordon Parks and make friends with Roy DeCarava and other great photographers, my husband, Carl Clark, included, who have passed the baton. And hopefully, as I teach photography, I will pass the baton to others, and perhaps there's a seed of change. will find very few photographers who like being in front of the camera, and I'm definitely one of them.
Continue the conversation and just sort of check in a little bit about, you know, who these artists are and why, you know, their works are significant, and then move into the present, because again, like, these artists have been creating for the last 20, 30, 40 years, you know, which is really amazing. And but after them, there have been all of these waves of other creatives, and I think it always surprises me, even to this day, you know, why people sleep on Baltimore. You know what I'm saying? It's like, do you know how many extraordinary minds come out of this space? You know how many extraordinary thinkers come out of Howard? How many extraordinary thinkers come out of Micah, out of Bowie State, out of Coppin State, out of Morgan State universities? How many HBCUs we have in this region who have created geniuses who have gone out into the world and made great change, but so can we talk a little bit about, we started with Joyce Scott, you know, why is Joyce Scott so significant and so prolific?
Well, let me put it this way. It was wonderful seeing those clips to the project of recording the voices, which I am so focused on now these days. Yes, I've written a lot, but now my writing is really focused on creating a place for the artist's voice. And one of the things that I noticed, from Joyce Scott to Martha Jackson Jarvis to Linda Day Clark, is the necessity of identifying what I call the ordinary, the common, the dismissed, displaced, underrepresented, misrepresented, badly represented, all right? Individuals, experiences, places, spaces, all right? And experiences. And what happens is that these things that have been so dismissed and maligned through either selective amnesia or benign neglect are the things that become extraordinary. So they go from the ordinary, the common, the mundane, to the extraordinary, which you, Angela, have talked about a lot in your work. And it is because of this that the power of their work is so resilient, because not only does it show the strength of the artists and their creativity and their vision, but it also is something that is a fire that they have found in the people who are just supposedly casually sitting on a step or walking down a street, but yet and still they have found the meaning and the purpose of these individuals' lives who have been glossed over. I think the story of BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, queer, whatever you, LGBTQ, all of those individuals who have been marginalized in our society, who are coming forward now with narratives and documentaries, which literally, as we have seen in the past 2 years, while we are under the relentless barrage of this COVID and the coming to light of the social injustices, what we are witnessing is that there is a tremendous surge of fire, of passion from the people who are trying to live a life every day, to the creatives in our community who are trying to capture these stories and archive them, present them, even to the highest of the hallmarks of artists. We haven't even mentioned those artists who were not in, you understand, this magnificent publication that you have done, this Up South publication, But we had people like Amy Sherrill. And Amy Sherrill is a product here, having grown up in the South, came to Baltimore to study at MICA. But what did she do? Just like Linda Day Clark, she walked the streets looking for the catalyst, the muse, who was going to fire her inspiration. And she would gently go up to these people and she would talk to them and say, I find you fascinating. I would like to incorporate your persona, your being, your presence. Just like Joshua Johnston did back in the early days, only he was commissioned to do it because, of course, Blacks were not part of that class culture. So here we have a preponderance of people in the communities of color. And no matter where you go in the United States, whether it's an indigenous community, a Latinx community, an Asian community, a queer community, people are moving forward to reclaim their agency, their sense of purpose, meaning, place. And we, at our level of experience or achievement, however you want to define it, are trying to create a place so that we can pass on the knowledge that we have accrued from doing work, which in the beginning of our careers, we were very often damned for. We were maligned. When I came out from my doctorate and I told people what I was going to do, I was told that was a waste of time. Why are you focusing on people of color? It's very simple. When I was coming up, going through school and went to the library and looked for people, persons, movements in the arts about my culture, my heritage, there was nothing on the shelf. I was devastated. So I retreated into my own creativity to make my own art, to validate the importance of this as part of the human experience. So here we are at this juncture, and now we are developing an army, and you can call us guerrillas if you want. You can call us mercenaries if you want. We don't care what you call us. We are doing the work that needs to be done to validate everything that we believe is important, that is directly connected to the ancestral heritage of the African diaspora. I was affirmed by this, by being mentored by people like Robert Ferris Thompson, who just recently passed, who wrote enormously important volumes of work. Just as you are collecting my books, Angela, which I will fill your shelves with the pieces you can't find. I promise you, that's my commitment to you. I have filled my shelf with the books of the likes of the Robert Ferris Thompsons, the Henry Drewels, who saw in Africa and the diaspora the connectivity and the paramount genius. Robert Ferris Thompson felt that this era that we are in is bringing one of the most magnificent traditions of this millennium to talk about what is the new creativity, the force of energy that we have been embodied with. So I make no apologies for my passion. I make no apologies for my creativity. If I can help or facilitate a group, an organization, a movement or whatever, I find it absolutely important because that's what I did in my administrative and teaching responsibilities when I was at MICA or wherever I was invited to work, because the classisms that we suffer through in this nation delete opportunities from so many worthy people.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's what's so extraordinary about your history and the history of many of these artists, right? Like many of the artists that we now know, you know, your favorite artists that were based in this region wouldn't have been able to go to school had it not been for your scholarships, right? Had it not been for your push and your initiatives to create diversity at very white institutions like MICA, for students who wanted to go and do a deeper dive into the arts, but were still very committed to Black aesthetics, you know?
Right. Right.
So that path that you set, right? Like we are stewarding forward, right? We are pushing forward.
Right. Absolutely.
We want to invite people in the audience to bring any questions. If you have any questions for me or for Dr. Leslie, please let us know. For folks that are in Miami proper, at Red Rooster, I believe that there are mics set up for you to pose questions, and we should be able to hear those, or they'll be forwarded, and then we can respond. For folks that are joining us virtually around the world via Zoom, feel free to pop your questions in the chat, and we should be able to receive those as well. And while we're waiting to get those in from folks, because I think we're in our last few minutes. Oh, I'm sorry, do we have a question?
No, nobody in the audience here in Miami has any questions, but do we have any questions via Zoom? No questions via Zoom.
Okay, so we are going to close out then, since we are right on time, it looks like, and just want to invite everyone to please check us out. Please support the work that we're doing. Check out vimeo.com, Exploring Presence, for information or to watch the shorts. There will be the exhibition will happen in May of 2022 at Morgan State University. So we're excited about that. The catalog can be purchased, and I believe that there's a link on the Prizm site with a link directly to the catalog, which again is called Exploring Presence, African American Artists in the Upper South. We're so grateful again for the opportunity to be in conversation and discourse with Prizm Art Fair, because we know we will reach, folks all over the world. We have to support each other in this work of highlighting Black creatives all over the world. That is the work that we are doing. That is the work that we are charged to do, and I feel very grateful to be supported in that work and in that effort.
Thank you so much, Angela and Leslie, for joining us this afternoon. I can't even begin to tell you how much hugely important to my own practice and the practice of the artists who are participating in Prizm. I've long been in awe of Leslie's contributions to our canon. And Angela, you are an amazing writer. Our conversations are always, I always have amazing takeaways from our conversations. So I really appreciate your time. And I hope we have opportunities to collaborate again in the future. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in to our second panel of the day with Leslie and Angela. Again, these panel talks are being brought to you by our event partners, the Knight Foundation, the Green Family Foundation, the Miami-Dade Department of Cultural Affairs, Florida Division of Cultural Affairs, Dashboard, and the Greater Miami Visitors and Convention Bureau. And please stay tuned. In the next 5 minutes, we will have our third and final panel for Prizm 2021.